Hi, everyone. On this first day of Netroots Nation 2021, congrats to Netroots on its 16th annual conference and for allowing us to be a part of it. On this panel, we're going to talk about January 6th insurrection, particularly how we're going to trace the traitors. On this panel, we're going to talk about the impact that the insurrection has had on our democracy, and importantly, the work that the organizations represented on this panel are doing to provide voters and taxpayers with the tools necessary to defend our voting rights. My name is Stephanie Miliano. I am the board member of Public Wise. In the next hour, we are going to hear from Christina Ball Owens, the executive director of Public Wise, Mark Elias of the Elias Law Group and founder of Democracy Docket, Austin Evers, the executive director of American Oversight, and Julie Milliken, vice president of Media Matters. We're going to receive plenty of information from them, and time permitting, we'll take some questions at the end. As we all know, the January 6th mob that overran the Capitol was incited by President Donald Trump. The mob included elected officials, public officials, police officers, military personnel, and other public employees. The actions of that day not only resulted in many injuries, deaths, and putting members of Congress in danger, but also threatened our democracy. Austin, your organization is keeping a very close eye on the developments since that day. How about you tell us a little bit of what's happened since the storming of the Capitol and where we are now?
Sure. Thanks for having me here today. It's a sober topic to be sure, and today is actually a very big day in terms of developments. So we all witnessed the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, and on that day, a crowd of violent protesters stormed the Capitol and broke into the House chamber where Congress was trying to certify the results of the 2020 election. It was an assault on our democracy itself. And we have learned that the intent behind all the different machinations around January 6th was really to stop the certification of the 2020 election. The attack has roots in Trump's efforts to overturn the election results via a number of election challenges, I think more than 50 lawsuits after the election, as well as an emerging story about how he and his allies tried to co-opt the United States government, in particular the Department of Justice, to overturn the results. But the event also has branches in the big lie movement that we are seeing today. You'll hear more, I'm sure, later about the growing number of terrible voting bills that are really based on the conspiracy theories that were also at the heart of the attack, but also ongoing investigations that are themselves manifestations of the same kind of conspiracies. Today, there are some pretty significant developments in Congress. The Senate Judiciary Committee released a report outlining the attempts to co-opt the Department of Justice to overturn the election, including efforts to potentially replace the acting attorney general with a Trump loyalist. Notable is that the minority, so the Republicans, members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, issued a staff report basically whitewashing that effort. It's a really important document in and of itself. And then today, Donald Trump instructed 4 of his advisors and aides who had received subpoenas from the House Select Committee on the January 6th attack. He instructed them not to cooperate with that investigation, not to testify, not to turn over documents. And we expect later today to find out that Trump will also be attempting to assert executive privilege to block the release of official White House documents by the National Archives, which is the custodian of his records from his time in office. So a lot of investigative steps coming to a head right now, literally as we speak.
And it's kind of, thank you for that recap. It's kind of incredible to, when you think back, it's only been 9 months. A lot has happened since, and there's still a lot of trauma surrounding the event. So for those of you in the audience who are listening, being a part of this, for whom it's a particularly sensitive topic, thank you again for being a part of this conversation. I would love to hear from each and every one of you. Why is it important to keep the drumbeat alive? Again, it's only been 9 months, but we keep hearing about it in the news. Why is it important to keep having these conversations and keep this fresh in taxpayers' minds? I will go with Christina.
Sure. Thanks, Stephanie. So for public wise, this really comes back to voting rights. Of course, we are a voting rights organization. At the end of 2020, we did some research with non-voters. We know that in 2020 there was record voter turnout. We also know that there were still people who chose to sit out voting, even with so many new options to vote, with so many reasons to vote. And we wanted to figure out why those people didn't vote. And so we did focus groups across battleground states, across demographics. And one of the themes that came up repeatedly was accountability or lack thereof. So people would say things to us like, I can vote in an election and someone can suppress my vote and it doesn't matter. Nothing will happen to them. They keep their job, they go on, they live their lives. Why should I go out and do anything about it? And people brought up some pretty egregious acts of voter suppression. And half of these, or maybe a few of these, happened before January 6th. Some of these focus groups happened after January 6th. So we at PublicWise really took this to heart, and we looked at how do we hold government, people in public trust, how do we hold these folks accountable? How do we encourage people to vote and let them know that there is accountability within the election system, within government? And we also really saw the acts, like Austin said, of January 6th, of silencing the voice of the voters. It was about contesting a very valid election. It was about silencing the voice of the American people. And some of the folks that participated in it, which we'll get into later, used taxpayer dollars to do that. So we thought it was particularly egregious. Those of us who have been working in politics for many years know that politics has an oddly short memory. So people can do things that are really egregious. And, like as Stephanie, you had said, it's 9 months later, we're finding that the conversation is already dying down. And this was people, they mounted gallows outside. They were chanting to hang elected officials. And people are just not paying attention to it anymore. So for PublicWise, this was really about memorializing these actions. This is about connecting it back to your voice matters, and there are people who will fight for your voice. And people who try to silence that will be held accountable in perpetuity.
That's right. How about you, Julie? How is keeping the drumbeat alive important to Media Matters and your mission?
So Media Matters is an organization. We actually primarily monitor the media. So we've been following right-wing media for, 16 or so years at this point, and have been watching in increasing horror, unfortunately, about how much the right-wing media has merged with the Republican Party, and during the Trump administration in particular, kind of basically took over our entire government. And so for us, I'll get into this in a little bit more detail. Our pathway to researching some of these people who were involved with the January 6th really stemmed from our monitoring of right-wing media figures and then far-right extremists, as well as some platform accountability work that we do. So we took looks at roles about how Facebook, for instance, was used to organize and coordinate the events that happened. So why it's important for us to continue looking forward is that we've been watching the right completely gaslight the public about what happened. They have rewrote history at this point. So it's not just that, to Christina's point, that the media in the national conversation has just more or less kind of died down about it. It's only been 9 months and suddenly it's this didn't happen. But now it's not only did this not happen, but it was not a big deal, or worse, this was just a big conspiracy and everybody's blowing this up. This was just peaceful protesters who were showing up. The people who were involved that are being charged criminally for it, or political prisoners that were fighting for freedom, et cetera. And it's been really alarming to watch how quickly that happened. I mean, I would say that the backpedaling from people being involved with January 6th and the fact that it happened lasted maybe 3 weeks before it was full blown spin cycle to change the narrative around the events. And the other thing that we have been particularly concerned with was getting back to this point about how much these movements have now been involved with our political system. Is now we're watching kind of what they're doing next. And so some of the things, for instance, the QAnon conspiracy theory, people who believe that were really involved with showing up in January 6th, but they're now taking the fight to local races, particularly school board races right now. So there's things that are happening on the local level that are particularly alarming, and we want to make sure that people are aware of what's going on in their own communities as well.
That's right. And Mark, I would love to hear from you. How is Democracy Docket working to keep the drumbeat alive?
So look, what we saw on January 6th, as was pointed out by I think Austin, was really a continuation of what we saw in the post-election period, right? First the Donald Trump and his allies tried to overturn a lawful election by going to court, and that didn't work. Then they tried to pressure state election officials, and that didn't work. And then finally, the big lie that had been spurred, that the Republican Party had been unwilling to tamp down, led to the violent insurrection in the Capitol, which was an effort at a coup. It was an effort to stop the peaceful transfer of power. You know, I think Austin hit this again right on the nose by pointing out that what they were in fact storming the Capitol for was not to occupy the Capitol, was not to hang flags in the Capitol, stuff that's gotten a lot of attention. What they were actually trying to do is to prevent the certification of the election on the day that the law requires the election to be certified by Congress. So they were quite literally trying to prevent a peaceful transfer of power. And that fact that they failed in 2020 should be a warning, not just to memorialize what happened on that day, but a warning for what we're going to face in the future. Right? We're a year out from midterm elections in 2022, 3 years from 2024. And what the reason why we need to memorialize and need to keep in front and center the violence and the effort of January 6th is, like I said, not just to memorialize the victims and what happened on January 6th, but because that is being used as an inspiration to what is going to happen in 2022 and 2024. It is an inspiration to Republican legislatures that are cutting back on voting rights. It is an inspiration to Republicans all around the country who are trying to infect our local election systems and our school boards with people who believe in wild right-wing conspiracy theories and don't want to allow for democracy to work. And so we need to focus on January 6th, not as a historical event, but we are in that history. We are living that history. We have not seen yet how January 6th ends. And so it is vitally important that the program and the project that PublicWise is undertaking to keep focused on the banality of evil, the ordinary people who did extraordinarily terrible things, that the exposing of that is so important, because I promise you, and I hope I'm wrong about this. I hope I'm wrong about this. But whether it is a year from now or it is 3 years from now, we will again have an opportunity to look back on January 6th and say that was not the end, it was the continuation.
That's right, Mark. We're still living the aftermath of January 6th, and it's going to reverberate through many election cycles. And as you mentioned, PublicWise is working in creating a tool along with various organizations, including Media Matters and American Oversight, to track exactly who is a part of it, particularly those who depend on taxpayer money for their salaries. Christina, can you tell us a little bit more about the scope of this project and what the goal is?
Sure, happy to. So PublicWise is creating a single point of access, a website that aggregates information that was gathered by all of our partners on individuals, organizations, elected officials, and other people in public trust, as you said, Stephanie, that were involved in January 6th. So one of the things that about PublicWise is that we are extremely data-driven and research-driven. So we were really concerned with the quality of research and the quality of the data that would be included in this database. We are not in the business of doxing. We are not in the business of looking at blurry photos and saying, maybe this person is the person down your street. We really wanted unimpeachable information from high quality resources. Of course, we turned to Media Matters and American Oversight as two of our partners. We also partnered with Campaign for Accountability, Advanced Democracy, Accountable US, and the Tech Transparency Project. PublicWise, since we are all in on accountability, we funded these groups to expand and to increase the depth of the work that they are doing. In addition to the research and the data that we got from them, PublicWise in-house looked at the DC docket. We did get some guidance from Mark Elias, who in my mind, there's no better legal information or legal guidance that you could get. We looked at the DC docket to see what charges were brought against individuals in relation to January 6th. From the DC docket, we are also able to look at the charges that were brought in home states. And all of this goes to, this is, and I will frame this very clearly, this is a nonpartisan database. We are looking at people, regardless of party, who were involved in January 6th. And we are aggregating this information to memorialize their actions, to keep them out of office, and to make sure that they are no longer able to silence the voice of voters. So there's a couple of ways that we're doing that. One, just having this information available to folks to be able to search by name, by location, by social media handle, being able to search who is involved. Also, we are creating with our developers a tool that will ping campaign finance records. So when someone files to run for office, we'll be able to bring that forward within our database. And from there, coming from a lot of us in PublicWise both come from government backgrounds and campaign backgrounds, we want this to be available to people doing Oppo research. We want this to be available to people who are doing research on these candidates. We just want it to be very clear in years and cycles going forward that if this person is running for office, that no one forgets what they did on January 6th. No one forgets their egregious acts. At this point, we have over 900 individuals that are included in this database, which includes nearly 175 sitting elected officials. We have 550 charged Capitol rioters and 104 organizations which supported or planned the insurrection. So we see that this is a large universe. The universe will continue to grow. We do not want this to be a static database. We'll continue to add, in addition to the campaign finance information, as charges are filed, as more is discovered. This will be a living database that will continue to memorialize this. And I do want to add one other thing that we are doing to really keep this current and make this a really valuable resource. We've even heard it on this panel. There's a lot of language that's used around January 6th. A lot of us have landed on insurrection. I've heard terrorist, which other people don't like. I've heard traitor. There has been some message testing going on, but we actually are fielding the survey right now with Change Research. We wanted to do really current message testing to see what resonates right now with voters and the general public. We are surveying 3,000 people to see the terminology that resonates with them. And then we are also looking at general attitudes, actually not general, specific attitudes towards accountability. So there's research that exists that talks about people wanting to hold insurrectionists accountable. But we wanted to look more deeply at what that means for people to be able to act on it and to make it actionable. So, what is the attitude towards someone who spoke at the rally, someone who paid for the rally, who organized buses, someone who attended? What is the different levels of accountability? Should these people be allowed to run for office? Should they be allowed to be appointed and have access to taxpayer dollars? What does that mean to people? We know we have very clear opinions on this, and I think everyone on this panel does. But we really wanted to make sure that this tool resonates with folks and is something that people will want to use, going forward.
That's great. And as you said, it's a tool that's going to be available to make sure that we are hyper aware of who we're electing or who we're considering to electing into office, making sure that we make a completely informed decision when we hit the polls. Thank you very much, Christina. It's amazing work. I'm going to go over to Mark. Mark, your organization has been very involved in litigating against state voter suppression laws and challenging redistricting maps. We also know that disinformation was a huge problem before this election, but also including this election, in eroding the trust of the voting process and spreading lies. And since January 6th, we've seen a litany of challenges to voting rights. So how do you contextualize what's going on? How does our history of voter suppression laws and tactics, how did that contribute to January 6th? And how has January 6th in a lot of ways fueled these attacks against our democratic process?
Yeah, so in 1972, Bob Dole, who was then a young senator, went to the Senate floor and said that anyone who wins a majority of the popular vote should be president, and that everyone should agree to that. They were at the time considering different changes to the Electoral College. And he said this as if it was self-evident, that there were debates about other pieces, but everyone would agree whoever won the popular vote should be president. Republicans are not a majority party in this country anymore. The media doesn't like to talk about it. I'm actually very curious what Julie has to say about that. But the fact is that George Bush lost the popular vote in 2000, won it in 2004. Then Republicans lost in 2008, 2012, 2016, 2020. If you add up the total number of votes for Democrats in the Senate versus Republicans in the Senate, it's lopsided by tens of millions. Same if you look at governors, same state legislatures. Like, the truth is, the Republican Party has become an anti-majoritarian party because they no longer can win majorities. So what they are left to do is to shrink the electorate, and they have turned to the same path that previous generations have, which is that they target Black, brown, and young voters. The history of our country is the disenfranchisement of Black voters, and then behind them, Hispanic, Latino voters, Native American voters, and also young voters. Texas in the early 1960s had a constitutional provision that prevented members of the military who were out of state from voting in Texas elections. Now, why did they do that? Two reasons. One, because the military had integrated, right? Number two, because they were young. And so we're seeing a very well-worn path of discriminating against the same communities of color and young voters that we've seen before. And Republicans have embraced this because they think it's their only way of winning elections, that if everyone could vote and everyone could participate, they don't have a chance to win. They need to shrink the electorate. And what we saw on January 6th was the frustration of a party that could not win a majority spilling out into violence in the nation's capital. And what we have seen since then has been state legislatures, Republican state legislatures, embracing the rhetoric, embracing the conspiracy theories, and embracing in their heads the existential threat they face if majorities can rule. And so they are passing laws in states like Florida, Georgia, Kansas, Iowa, Montana, Texas, right? Red states, blue states, red states, purple states, wherever they control power, they are trying to tamp down on voting rights. And they're doing it in the same ways, targeting the same communities from state to state to state. So you can't disaggregate the history of voter suppression with the tactic that is being used now from what we saw in the post-election period, where Austin, it was 65 cases. Donald Trump lost 64 of them. He won one in Pennsylvania. It amounted to a few dozen votes. But if you look at all of these, it is the gasp of a party that can no longer win through allowing majoritarian principles to prevail.
Thank you so much, Mark. Julie, I would love to kind of go back to Mark's question about this perception that the Republican Party isn't shrinking, that it's much larger than it actually is. And how is that reflected in the media?
I'll try to keep it brief because this is something I could probably talk your ear off about. But I think that there's two different main things that I think contribute to this. Number one is the right has had a long-standing, like decades-long, since Nixon really was when this really started, war on the media and this idea that the media is liberally biased against them, and they've successfully worked the rocks in that manner, basically. I remember just dating myself here, but I remember when Fox News legitimately was treated as a fair and balanced news organization. Everybody bought it. They were all just totally afraid to say anything otherwise because the media has so internalized this idea that speaking the truth about something, even if it's critical of the Republicans or the right, will somehow make them liberally biased when really it's just the facts. And so I think there's a reluctance there to call out the right, and there's also an overcompensation for representing their viewpoint because of that, because they're so afraid of being looked at as being anything but, you know, nonpartisan, just arbiters of the truth, just reporting what's actually happening. So like that's one side of it. And the other side of it is, like, frankly, the Beltway press is just really incestuous. Like they are going to parties with the people that they're reporting on. You know, they love access to power. The way that, you know, Republicans have been able to take advantage of our system, the way Mark was describing, has given them an outsized seat at the table when it comes to congressional representation, Senate representation, et cetera. And the press just wants to access. And so there is like this, again, a knee-jerk reaction not to upset the people who they want to be talking to. So again, it constantly, time and time again, leads to these failures in accurately contextualizing what's happening in this country, and accurately contextualizing just like how unpopular like the right's positions are. So that's my short answer of it. But if you want, we can get on a soapbox and I can talk about this for an hour.
I bet. Austin, how do you see then through your work how our history of voter suppression has led to this moment?
Well, one of the things that most troubles me right now is access to the polls should not be a partisan issue. But increasingly what you hear is that the idea of getting someone to vote is somehow a partisan act. We actually just saw this. I saw some rhetoric out of Wisconsin like this the other day, which is the idea that municipalities put out drop boxes or created registration opportunities to make it easier to register to vote and to cast a ballot was somehow a partisan advantage. That is a constitutional right that's being exercised. That it is making democracy itself a partisan issue, and that is extremely, extremely dangerous. One place that American Oversight is really working hard on this are some of the big lie manifestations that we're seeing today. We just wrapped a hearing in Arizona in court about the so-called audit that has been going on there by cyber ninjas. We've successfully we won court orders requiring cyber ninjas to turn over internal documents. We're also filing a lawsuit today in Wisconsin to go after a new audit or investigation that's underway by a former state Supreme Court justice there. And I want to flag there's two things about this that are just fundamentally problematic. One, these are based in conspiracies. They are disinformation activities that are designed to reduce confidence in the election. That's clear on its face. But what I am most worried about is what do they do with that softened ground that they couldn't achieve in 2020? What we saw on January 6th was a shockingly large number of people willing to commit violence because they didn't like an outcome. They didn't play this like a long game. They played this like the stakes were absolute. If you convince more people in more states that there are extra legal, extra constitutional ways to get their voice counted over others, they're going to take it. And so these audits, I think, and investigations are investments in authoritarianism that need to be pushed back on. And that starts with January 6th. It is a contested event. People are trying to rewrite that history today. Read the minority report from the Senate Judiciary Committee. It is shocking what they're trying to get away with. But read it in the context of the next round of elections. It does not matter which party is pulling this stuff. What matters is that people can vote, that those votes are counted, and that the results are certified, period.
And a lot of your work and the work of everyone here on the panel is to make sure that the facts are straight, that we keep the facts straight, and that we memorialize this properly and accurately. So I want to turn really quickly to Austin and Julie. Both of your organizations are doing a lot of research that will feed into the database that PublicWise is putting together. Can you both discuss your scope of work, how that feeds into the PublicWise database, and talk to us a little bit about your process and how you're going about it? So start with Julie.
Sure. Hi. So Media Matters, our approach maybe is going to be a little bit different than some of the other organizations involved here. So I'll just kind of give you a brief overview of it. basically after January 6th happened, we immediately went into overdrive trying to just basically document as much as we could, because we knew that people were getting kicked off of social media, that like Parler was going down, you know, all of these things that were happening. And there was basically like the receipts were being lost like in real time. So what we had to do initially was go and archive as much stuff as we possibly could, because we had access to a lot of these things. We've been monitoring a lot of these platforms. We monitor a lot of right-wing media channels, YouTube, you know, podcasters, et cetera, that all played a role in promoting like the events that happened and what was going on. And we knew we needed to have that information available so that we could then go back and start to sort through like, what do we know about this? You know, who was involved? How were they all connected? You know, what can we find out there? So that was like step one, was just a ton of archiving as fast as we could, because the stuff was just getting disappeared as quickly as possible. And then from there, we just started pulling in threads to see, you know, what we could map out. So I'll just give you an example, because I think this is one of the more, you know, interesting ones about how we were able to start tracing some of these figures to like more public officials. So I'm not sure people are familiar with a right-wing extremist. His name is Ali Alexander. He's just kind of this far-right gadfly who got really his notoriety through organizing a lot of these Stop the Steal rallies that were happening after the election, like through December, in the lead up to January 6th. And he had a large social media presence. He had periscopes that he did. He was on Parler, he was on Telegram, he was on Twitter, you name it. He was on it, and he was kind of a blabbermouth. He posted a lot about the people that he was communicating with. And he had got connected with Alex Jones, who is a well-known InfoWars host. He's a major conspiracy theorist. I would imagine everybody's familiar with him at this point, but if not, you know, he probably became most famous initially for denying that Sandy Hook occurred, and like, you know, declared this was a false flag. He got sued by it by parents. Actually, just lost the lawsuit a couple weeks ago. But anyway, so Alexander and Alex Jones had teamed up to then start to promote this January 6th event. They did it in response to Trump saying there's going to be this wild protest. They said, we're going to do a wild protest. Here's what's going to happen. Alex Jones also likes to run his mouth quite a bit. Talks quite a lot about the people that he's supposedly in contact with, and likes to brag about, in particular with bragging about close ties that he had to the White House. He claimed that the White House wanted him involved with this stuff, etc. So we just started looking into who is it that they're naming and what more do we know about this. So one of the things that jumped out immediately was there are 3 members of Congress that Ali Alexander had said that he worked very closely with, Paul Gosar, Andy Biggs, and Mo Brooks. And we started digging into their social media presence and their activities and their interviews that they had done to see like what we could find that might substantiate what they were saying. Because, you know, the thing with these people is you just never know what's like bluster and what's real. It's really difficult to tell. And while all 3 have now denied that they were involved, there's certainly, like, especially with Paul Gosar, like lots of reasons to think that that's not the case. Paul Gosar, for instance, what we found was that he was he repeatedly tweeting, like tagging Ali Alexander in his tweets, promoting Stop the Steal events. He actually spoke at a Stop the Steal event in Arizona in December. He also started tweeting things that were lining up with what Alexander was saying. So for instance, and we found a phone call that Ali Alexander claimed to have had in December that he said, you know, we're hoping this is the call that changes the world. At the exact same time, Paul Gosar is having this phone call that he's tweeting about that was saying that he was in a meeting with Mo Brooks, Andy Biggs, Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and Matt Gaetz, and Mark Meadows. And the purpose of that meeting, according to Gosar, was talking about the leading this charge against not certifying the election. That at least confirmed to us that those 3 were kind of working together with the administration, with Trump, and, you know, the Trump campaign, and some Trump campaign figures to try to like push this conspiracy theory. And then we were curious about things like Alex Jones claiming that he was receiving funding and White House instructions to to run with the event. So we started looking into that, thinking what was going on with that. Well, what it turns out was that there's a public heiress, who was actually funding Jones, surprisingly enough. She had gotten a hold of Carolyn Wren, who was a Trump administration, like a big Trump fundraiser, told her like, hey, I want to help with this thing that Jones and Alexander are trying to do. Now, there were two parallel events that were happening. There was two events that were supposed to be happening on January 6th. You know, there was the main event, and then there was this like side event that was Jones and Alexander, et cetera. I'll get to that in just a second. So Carolyn Wren gets involved with running the main event. And the whole time she's pushing to have Ali Alexander and Alex Jones involved with this. And it turns like it becomes this whole thing. They get the Trump administration, the campaign involved. Katrina Pearson had to go to Trump himself, according to ProPublica, to actually tell him like, hey, she's trying to push for them to be on stage with them. Roger Stone as well. You know, we don't think this is a great idea. We think that they should have a separate event. We can make sure that they're still being represented, but they're going to have it the 5th. Trump agrees to this. That's what happened. They had this event on the 5th. But they still have VIP passes to the event on the 6th. And then what happened on the 6th, though, was that Wren actually escorted them out early and said that in which Alex Jones claims that the White House told him to lead this march onto the Capitol. And then surprisingly to everybody apparently involved with organizing the main event, Trump at the end of his speech then included that line about, and I understand now that it's time for everybody to walk down and do this march. And there's emails. This again was something ProPublica had unearthed, but it helps like kind of connect some dots between the things that we were seeing between these people who were organizing the main event that were saying we had no idea that he was going to say this. What is he talking about? So it really led us to beg the question of like how much more was going on there. And so that's just kind of the thing that we would do is just kind of piece all this stuff together and then see what fits, what doesn't, who's involved, who isn't, what can we confirm, what isn't, and then put together dossiers on all of them. And then just really briefly, like just a kind of good overview, we did that with from a lot of different angles. And so we also looked at people who were tied to conspiracy, like theorists, YouTube pages, et cetera, blogs, and that were there at the insurrection that then were making similar claims about all these ties that they had with like influential public figures, trying to piece all that together and putting it into dossiers that we could then use for the PublicWise database. So there's just a lot. We have dozens and dozens of them at this point. But that was roughly just kind of a little case study, how we did it, but also how we kind of approach our work.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie. Austin, how are you contributing to, how is your work contributing to the PublicWise database?
Sure. So American Oversight specializes in using transparency tools that are actually available to all of you out there. We use the Federal Freedom of Information Act and state open records laws to obtain documents from the government. And January 6th is this heartbreaking but really interesting case where the federal government was both in part the perpetrator of the attack, but also the target of the attack. And so we are pursuing FOIA requests and litigation on both angles. And I'll keep it pretty brief. But when it comes to the perpetrator side of things, we are looking for the text messages and calendars and notes and emails of senior officials who increasingly we know were at the heart of some of the machinations around the event, whether it was knowledge of the event, participation in the conversations leading up to it, potentially taking out the leadership of the Department of Justice and replacing it with a more Stop the Steal friendly team. But on the same side, I think it's really important to also recognize that the federal government did a very bad job of defending itself. And there were plenty of signs that this was not a First Amendment protest. This was a pent-up ball of rage that was planning on mobilizing towards the Capitol, at least aspects of it. People knew that members of right-wing militia groups were likely to be in attendance, and there were warning signs. There were, in fact, warnings. And so we're also investigating what federal agencies knew or should have known about what was coming, and how they responded. I think there's, the facts are still coming out, but DoD played the Department of Defense played a really critical role here, in that they could have deployed the National Guard earlier to protect the Capitol compound. So we're investigating both the perpetrator side, bad actors in government using government power to carry out this insurrection or coup attempt, and also people on the inside who either knew, should have known of the attack, and didn't do a very good job of defending themselves. We've done similar things, for example, about like the Lafayette Square clearance in 2020. We are, to give a plug to the public-wise resource, I think the way American Oversight approaches this is really instructive and hopefully inspirational for other people. This is a feedback loop of research. So when a group like Media Matters finds evidence that a state official or PublicWise posts a dossier showing that a state official from Arizona was involved in Stop the Steal or January 6th activities, we can jump on that at American Oversight and pursue their government records to expose more about it. And so this isn't just a repository, it's really an active resource for us, and the information sharing that's going on is critical. We're also seeing information coming out of Congress. Oh, that's a DOJ official I didn't appreciate wasn't involved. We should look after them. There's a line in the majority report out of the Senate today that referenced the Jeffrey Clark, who was the guy who was hoping to maybe become acting attorney general to help carry out the election steal. May have been supported by.
He was hoping for more than that.
Yeah, right. He may have been supported by several lower level Department of Justice officials, and I want to know more about that. So we're using these open records tools to go after it.
That's fascinating. Thank you so much, Austin, for that work. Christina, so PublicWise is putting together this amazing database, taking all this information and making it very digestible and very accessible to voters, taxpayers, other Americans who are working very hard to protect voting rights. When can we see it?
So I want to actually share a screen, and we have a demo version that is up now. If folks can let me know if they can see my screen, that'd be great. We have a demo version that's available now. The full version, including the campaign finance piece, will be available on January 6th, so the anniversary of the riot. I do want to walk us through it. I'm incredibly proud of the work that the team at PublicWise has put together, and also the research, the quality of the research that our partners have contributed. You can see from Julia and Austin, we have some of the top experts working on this. So this is insurrectionindex.org. This is our working title. Again, our messaging research may shape some of that, but this is the Insurrection Index. Anyone on this stream can go visit this now, have some rabbit hole research if you want to check out what we have. This is the homepage. You can see that searchable. I searched by QAnon shaman earlier. It will take you to the profile. We'll look at the profiles shortly. But we wanted this also to be searchable by location, by name, by social media handle, by association. So, there's different ways that each of these profiles are tagged. I'm going to take you to our About page. We have a lot of the quotes that we thought were really powerful from some of the hearings that came, that happened on Capitol Hill around January 6th. This box here that says as of September 2021 will be updated with current numbers of how many people, individuals, elected officials, and organizations. We are currently loading in as we speak. We're loading in additional profiles. So this will be updated to show the full scope of the project. And again, we wanted to be clear on what our areas of focus are. I am going to skip over, actually, no, let's go through the partners because this is a key area of it. again, 2 of our partners are here. These are all of our partners. Accountable.us is the top, and each of them shows what area of research they did, so you can also get a better understanding of the scope of this database. Accountable US focused on corporate accountability, so corporations that were somehow involved in either the funding or organizing or outreach for January 6th. Advanced Democracy looked at far-right forums, FEC contributions, and social media. American Oversight, we heard at length from Austin about their incredible work. Campaign for Accountability looked at public officials that were involved. And I should say, there's a lot of focus on, federal public officials, but there are quite a few local, very local public officials that were involved and that are included in this database. Media Matters, we heard from Julie on their incredible work. I do want to highlight that one of the things that was really intriguing to us in our initial conversations with Media Matters was looking at staff involvement. Again, a lot of us came from government. So we wanted to look at not just the elected officials, but chiefs of staff and comms directors and, a lot of the senior staff who, not only are acting on behalf of their principal, but also could be using government resources like laptops or, anything that was actually about using government and taxpayer paid resources. Public-wise, of course, I talked about our DC court docket. And the Tech Transparency Project is looking specifically at military, police and law enforcement, and far-right forums. So again, you can see that we really did want to have both high quality research, but a large breadth. Before I get to records, which I think is it's all exciting, but the most exciting part, we also wanted to share the data sets from our partners. I will say, our partners that are on here included, it's been really wonderful how people have made their research publicly available. The whole point is that it should not be happening under some sort of veil, that this should be all publicly available to voters and to people across the country. So you can see everyone's different data sets if you click on their names. And then we also wanted, to be able to create a full research experience. There are relevant resources that are were not the data sets that we use to include to create this database, but that are important. If you're doing any sort of research on January 6th, all of these are really wonderful. One I can hide, they're not wonderful. They have really dark and awful information, but I should say they are really useful. Representative Lofgren's report, I should say, was one of the first things that I read, and it has a really large amount of information that's pretty comprehensive and has been the basis for a lot for both our partners and for some of the committees and the folks that are working in government. And then taking us over to records. If you look through, you can search again here. You can search records, you can filter by state. We did focus first on California, New Jersey, and Virginia, because those are the 3 states that have elections in 2021. So you can see that those states are right now the most populated because we wanted to load those profiles in first. You can search by candidate, elected official, individual, key profile, organization. We also wanted to look at different actions that people have been asking about and that a lot of folks are interested in. So folks who organize for the 6th. And then I just wanted to point out, you can organize this or filter this by voted against certification. We did not consider voting against certification as a sole reason to be included in this database. We do think people have the right to vote or elected officials, but we did want to point out who that is included in here did vote against certification. So I'm going to take us to key profiles. And I'm going to highlight this gentleman. So this is a profile for James Richard or J.R. Majewski. This actually, we can see the source here, came from Media Matters and the information and the data that they gave us. Each of these profiles has, some top lines on what their involvement was. We do talk about whether they were charged and convicted or whether or not they were not. Being charged was one of our criteria, but we also did want to include people who maybe were not, there was no crimes that they were charged on, but there were very clear receipts that they somehow either funded or led up to the narrative, which you'll see later, that created the conditions for January 6th to happen. This person is based in Ohio. He actually did come to some notoriety. He painted his entire backyard as a Trump flag so that planes flying over could see his giant lawn sign. He is running for office. He's already declared, so we're able to have that. He's running for House of Representatives in Ohio, District 9. We have backgrounds on each of these folks, which you could read. And then this is the part that, I mean, a lot of it's important, but we did want to be able to have receipts, the real proof of what folks did. And as Julie said, a lot of these folks were blabbermouths and shared freely their involvement. So you can see here, this is his own Twitter of him organizing folks going to the Capitol, apparently the 8 subway, and people thanking him for working to get patriots, quote, patriots to DC. So we can see what his involvement was. Each of the folks, you can also, I think this is something important too, the social media handles here and different affiliations. So he is affiliated with QAnon and he's also an Air Force veteran. I wanted to also take us to an elected official. If you go to elected official, then there's Cynthia Loomis. She's from Wyoming. You can click on here. So this is an example of someone, there are no charges against her, but she was very key in spreading disinformation about the validity of the election. So here we have her media, we have her tweets that talk about the misinformation that she spread and how. We have her social media handles, so you can go and see if there's more, or see what's there. She is incumbent, she's a sitting senator. And you can go through and see what she has said publicly that we feel, or that did lead to the events of January 6th. So again, this is our demo site. We welcome people to contact, to go and to look around. I do also want to point out that on the site page, there is the ability to contact us at info@insurrectionindex.org. So this is for a few reasons. One, we are an organization that believes in criminal justice. If there's something incorrect, we're saying that you're charged with something or not, you should have the right to send it to us. Also, we are looking for local, if there are folks who have someone that they want us to look at, or if there are local tips or anything like that, we want to be able to have this be a tool that people can give feedback on, can give us more information on. And again, I welcome folks to go to it and to know that the full launch of this will be on January 6th of 2022. I'm gonna stop sharing now.
Okay. So the insurrectionindex.org, that's where everyone who's on this, everyone in the audience can access this website that Christina just walked us through. So please make sure to go visit the insurrectionindex.org. And for folks who have questions, we welcome you to email info@insurrectionindex.org to share your questions with PublicWise and everyone who's involved in this really amazing project. So as we wrap up, I would love to hear from all of you. What can our friends in the audience do to make sure that we don't forget what happened on January 6th, and what can we best do to sort of interrupt the deleterious effects and the ripple effect of January 6th? Christina, let's start with you.
So I guess there's two things I want to say. I wanted to actually expand on what Julie had brought up about the idea of reporting the truth becoming a partisan issue. We have gotten that reaction to this. We are not doing this by party. We've listed people's party, but we are looking at people who are involved in January 6th. And I think we as a movement who believes in accountability, we cannot let the idea of partisanship be co-opted we have to say that reporting the truth is not a partisan issue. The right to vote is not a partisan issue. It is reporting the truth. It is reporting what is there. And I really, I worry about the idea of these issues being marked as partisan when they are not. They are letting the public know what is happening. They're letting voters know what is happening and giving information. I just want to say we can't let these people get away with this. This was an egregious act of violence. We have talked to government officials, and Stephanie, you touched on this. I mean, we talk about this as a very, I guess we talk about this as, as an act of history, right? It is living. There are people living with trauma from this. I mean, we heard some really compelling testimony from Capitol Police. We can't let these folks get away with this, both on the macro level of silencing voters, of trying to overthrow a valid election, and on the idea that we cannot have this be a tactic that is used going forward. That if you don't believe in what the election says or what the election results are, that these are that you can use violence to overthrow the government in those results. It's strange to me to feel like I have to say this or drive this home, but it's just, and the conversations were happening 9 months later, people are kind of letting it go. And if there's any take home for the folks that are watching this, please do not let this go. Please let this narrative keep going. And, as we said, this is not over, and we can't let it be over.
Thank you so much, Christina. Julie, Austin, Mark, in 45 seconds each, what can our friends in the audience do to keep this conversation going and make sure that we defend our democracy? Mark.
Look, the thing I always tell people is that we need everyone to stand up in the town square and shout out that this is not okay. They can't let this fall into the backdrop. They can't let this get overtaken by other events in your lives. For some of you, your town square is going to be something like this. If you're Christina, you get to talk to all of you. If you're Austin, you get to talk to lots of people. For others of you, your town square may be your friend group, your text chain, your neighbors, your family, your friends. And what I'd ask you to do is to not shirk away from having those conversations, not shirk away when your crazy uncle says that they believe that Donald Trump really won. Confront the wrong and stand up in the town square and be counted.
Great. Julie?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Mark and Christina said. Just quickly, I guess to add to that, the thing that I would love for people to do is just to pay attention to what's happening locally. That's a really big concern of mine right now, is that these people, they're not going anywhere. They didn't just disappear after January 6th. They have regrouped, they have a plan, they have a strategy, and pay attention to what's happening in your local races and investigate who these people are, what their backgrounds are, do they have connections to what happened here, and just really educate yourself and educate your friends and educate your family. It's the best thing we can do, I think, is just to be involved and to be paying attention.
Austin?
I will second all of that. I will just really underscore that last point. Democracy was attacked physically on January 6th. It is under assault right now in Arizona, this crazy audit that's happening. In Wisconsin, it's just getting going. In Florida, they're pushing for an audit. In Texas, they're pushing for an audit. And there's all these terrible new voter laws that are in place that are going to get implemented over the next year. All of you are on the front lines of democracy as citizens. And you need to be involved and you need to watch how the spirit of January 6th is manifesting today and in the future, and stay vigilant. Meanwhile, we're going to track all this information because anyone who is tapping into the big lie to tap into power, we need to make sure that they are defined by January 6th.
And please visit insurrectionindex.org. We didn't get to answer questions here live, but please email us any questions about the index or any of the work that these organizations are doing by emailing info@insurrectionindex.org. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks.